Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today we're taking a deep dive into El Camino del Libertario by Javier Milei. Now this isn't just, a straightforward political biography. It's really a journey. It tracks the intellectual and personal evolution of a figure who, dramatically reshaped the political landscape in Argentina.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. The book basically traces Milei's path. It starts with him as this curious kid grappling with hyperinflation, that chaos in Argentina, and follows him all the way to becoming a prominent economist and then, a major political force. It really digs into his personal story, how his thinking shifted towards this pretty radical libertarianism and his very strong critiques of the state, of central banking.
Right.
He's fiercely defending free markets, individual liberty, and it's all delivered with his, let's say, unique mix of academic arguments and, pretty unconventional communication style.
Definitely unconventional.
And the book's core message, really, as he presents it, is that these ideas aren't just theories. He sees them as morally superior and believes they're the actual path to prosperity and ultimately happiness.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to unpack this really complex journey. We want to reveal those key moments, the ideas that shaped his thinking. And we'll explore the arguments he makes, often quite provocative ones, in his own words. We're going to follow his path pretty much chronologically, starting from his early life right up to his emergence on the national and international stage. So let's begin. Okay, so Javier Milei, born in 1970, grew up in a middle-class family in Argentina. And he talks about being just 11 back in April 82, hearing the economy minister Lorenzo Sigot say that famous phrase, el que apuesta al dólar pierde.
He who bets on the dollar loses.
Yeah, exactly. And ironically, that moment really kicked off this period of severe economic trouble, didn't it? And widespread skepticism about what officials were saying.
Well, absolutely. And that period, especially with things like the government's circular 1050, this was a measure that basically re-indexed debts to inflation. It caused huge repricing, financial distress everywhere. Seeing that, how it affected people's everyday lives, that profoundly impacted him. Seeing well-being tied so directly to these economic shifts. And that's what led him to decide, okay, I need to study economics. I need to understand this.
But economics wasn't his only passion early on, right? He was also really into football. Can you tell us a bit about his time as a goalkeeper? He connects that experience to his later persona, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. He was seriously dedicated. A goalkeeper for Chacarita Juniors, training like 6 hours a day. He talks about how he had to compensate for his height, jumping incredibly high. And he often reflects on that goalkeeper personality, the different uniform, training alone, celebrating alone, being alone when you make a mistake. He feels it mirrors his later public image, this kind of individual standing apart, taking full responsibility.
Interesting parallel. But this football dedication, it hit a wall, didn't it? A really dramatic turning point.
It really did. It was June 1989. Hyperinflation was just rampant. He recalls going to the supermarket with his mom, seeing workers frantically repricing everything with those little pricing guns, people grabbing stuff off shelves.
Chaos.
Total chaos. And he was just baffled. It completely contradicted what he was learning in his first year of economics at uni. He remembers thinking, either what I'm studying is totally wrong, or I'm just an idiot who doesn't get it.
Yeah.
That experience, it was so powerful that right then and there he decided, that's it for football. He just dove headfirst into economics, needing to figure out why reality looks so different from the theory.
Wow. And just to add another layer, because his background is full of these interesting twists, he was also briefly in music, sang in a Rolling Stones tribute band.
Yeah, called Everest. Apparently his bandmates thought he was pretty good, but Milei himself wasn't so sure about his vocal talents. It just adds to this, unconventional path he took.
Definitely. So moving on to his academic journey, he first did a master's at IDs, and he says he studied Keynesianism really deeply there.
That's right. Studied Keynesianism in depth, as he puts it. He even became a microeconomics assistant at the University of Buenos Aires, UBA.
Okay. But despite being strong in micro, he hit some frustration with macroeconomics, particularly when he was working at HSBC.
Yeah, exactly. He felt he was always missing the mark with macro predictions. The standard models just didn't seem to work for Argentina's, extremely volatile economy. And that frustration really pushed him towards getting a postgraduate degree at Universidad Torquato de Tella.
And de Tella seems to be where a big shift happened.
A huge shift. He describes himself becoming a recalcitrant, absolutely orthodox neoclassical economist there. He got deep into modern macro, real business cycle theory, lots of complex math, intertemporal general equilibrium, trying to model how economies balance choices over time. But even then, he felt something was off. He called these models aesthetically beautiful, mathematically, but said they lacked heart, they lacked soul. Just an empty beauty, he felt, because they missed the human side of economics.
Which leads to that anecdote about the presentation in Tucumán.
Yes. He talks about giving this terrible presentation, losing the audience completely, ending up just drawing complex math on a flip chart.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. But afterwards, in an elevator, Professor Juan Carlos de Pablo gave him this amazing piece of advice. He said, "I'll give you 5 floors to tell me the same thing, but as a story."
That's brilliant.
It was transformative for Milei. It taught him how crucial it is to communicate complex stuff in a way people can actually grasp, a skill that became, essential for his media career later on.
Right. And de Pablo apparently joked he'd end up like Espert, another libertarian economist.
He did. And Milei shot back, "Then I'll be like Espert with a wig."
Yeah.
Classic Milei. He also mentions his time at Studio Broda, a big consulting firm, calling it a great school that really set people up for success.
So his framework is evolving, but then comes the 2008 subprime crisis. That seems to have been another major jolt.
Absolutely. He went back and reread Friedman, reread Keynes, and he felt like mainstream economics was just repeating the same mistakes in how it responded to the crisis.
And this pushed him towards studying economic growth specifically.
Yes, going back to Adam Smith's fundamental question, the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, he got really fascinated by that hockey stick graph.
Yeah.
How GDP per capita just exploded in the last 200 years compared to the 18 centuries before. For Milei, this wasn't just data. It made him question the standard neoclassical view that concentrated markets, monopolies, are inherently bad. If that were true, how do you explain this massive wealth creation, often driven by large, successful companies? It made him think the whole framework for understanding market structure might be wrong.
So was there a specific trigger for this questioning?
There was. He calls it a shock. He discovered Murray Rothbard's essay Monopoly and Competition, part of Man, Economy, and State. Read it in an afternoon. And it completely blew his mind. He said, everything I had been teaching for more than 20 years about market structures was wrong. Rothbard's argument was radical. Harmful monopoly only comes from the state through protection, regulation. A firm that dominates a free market does so by serving customers best. It's a social benefactor, not a villain.
That's a huge shift in perspective, and that led him straight to the Austrian school. Menger, Mises, Hayek.
Directly. He saw how Menger's subjective theory of value comes from individual preference, not labor input, just dismantled Marx's whole exploitation argument. And critically, he realized that even well-meaning neoclassical economics, with its focus on market failures, could easily lead down the path to state interventionism. The Austrians showed him a different way, connecting economics fundamentally to freedom and showing how intervention logically leads towards, as Hayek called it, the road to serfdom.
Okay, so his ideas are solidifying. How did he then break into the media sphere?
It started with an article, Acorralados por el fantasma del Rodrigazo, cornered by the ghost of the Rodrigazo, referencing an old Argentine crisis. He says it caused such a mess that the perfil page crashed, and it happened right during a currency crisis, so suddenly people knew who he was.
Talk about timing. And he had help honing his media style.
Definitely. He credits mentors like Daniel Simonuti and Mauro Viale. They taught him to be super concise, deliver that KO punch in just a few minutes on air. Then Alejandro Fantino on Animales Sueltos really boosted his profile, leading to appearances on Intradables, that big debate show. He speaks very highly of them.
And the book gives some behind-the-scenes stuff about his move into politics too, right? Like the superhero costume?
Yeah, apparently Lilia Lemoyne was key in creating the God, Emperor, ANCAP, anarcho-capitalist costume and image. And that documentary, Pandanomics, during the pandemic got huge views, over 1 million. Plus, his sister Karina, El Jefe, the boss, she's managing everything, his schedule even, reportedly cutting his hair. She saw his sort of rock star appeal building up close.
So you see this groundswell of support, especially among younger people, and the pandemic lockdowns seem to have played a role.
He argues they did. A sort of revaluation of liberty happened for many. He felt that just winning the cultural battle wasn't enough anymore. Political action was needed. That's what led to forming the La Libertad Avanza Alliance.
And back to that goalkeeper analogy, he was willing to actually get into the mud of politics, unlike people just criticizing from the sidelines. He pushed back hard against things like the 7 votes from Venezuela smear campaign, too.
Right. And this led to what people started calling the Milei effect. He had surprising electoral success, winning in areas, even lower-income ones, where pundits thought his ideas wouldn't fly. It showed his brand of liberalism could resonate broadly. And importantly, he stuck to his guns, didn't really change his message depending on the audience.
Okay, so we've traced the how, his journey. Now let's dig into the what. The core arguments that define this radical libertarian philosophy he developed. He frames the choice very starkly, doesn't he? It's capitalism or communism, liberalism or socialism. No middle ground.
Absolutely no middle ground. He calls any intermediate solutions an abomination. And it's crucial, like you said, to remember that when he says liberalism, he means classical liberalism, focused on individual rights and free markets.
So how does he define that liberalism?
His definition is very specific. The unrestricted respect for the life project of others, based on the principle of non-aggression, in defense of the right to life, liberty, and property. Individual freedom and non-aggression are absolutely paramount. That's the foundation.
And stemming from that, his view of the state is, well, intense. A criminal organization, supreme aggressor, mafia with legal backing, the greatest enemy of society. Where does this extreme view come from, theoretically?
It comes directly from that non-aggression principle and its Austrian economics background. He sees the state by its very nature as relying on coercion, taxation as taking property by force, regulation interferes with voluntary exchange. He'd point to thinkers like Lysander Spooner, maybe, who questioned government legitimacy. For Milei, any state action, no matter how well-intentioned, violates individual liberty and property rights. And he'd argue Argentina's history is Exhibit A for the state causing instability and corruption.
Okay, and that connects to his critique of socialism and collectivism, which he calls a theoretical error, and blames for, I think the number he uses is 150 million human beings assassinated. Why does he see it as such a fundamental error?
The core theoretical error, for him, lies in the labor theory of value, the idea that labor determines a good's value. That's the basis for Marx's concept of exploitation. Milei argues this was completely disproven by the subjective theory of value from Menger and the Austrians' value, is based on what individuals think something is worth, not how much work went into it. If you remove the labor theory of value, he argues, the whole intellectual justification for socialism, class struggle, state control, it just collapses.
Got it. And this leads us to monetary policy, which he's incredibly vocal about. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, a scam, an unlegislated tax. And the solution: get rid of the central bank entirely. Move to 100% reserve banking, currency competition dollars, gold, whatever works. He even smashed a central bank piñata for his birthday. What's the economic thinking there?
It's really about taking away the state's power to print money. He sees inflation as theft by devaluation. Eliminating the central bank removes that power, stops politicians from funding spending by essentially taxing people indirectly through inflation. 100% reserves mean banks can't just create money out of thin air through lending. Currency competition forces money itself to be subject to market discipline. It's all about, for him, restoring monetary integrity and protecting people's savings, their property, from the state.
So if the state is the enemy and its monetary tools are illegitimate, what's the positive vision? How should society work?
His vision rests on what he calls capitalism's 5 key institutions. 1. Private property, the incentive to create and care for things. 2. Free markets, voluntary exchange, price signals guiding resources. 3. Competition driving efficiency, benefiting consumers. 4. Division of labor boosting productivity massively. And 5. Social cooperation, how specialization leads to mutual benefit. He argues these don't create conflict, they foster deep social cooperation and are the reason we've seen that incredible drop in global poverty historically. For him, capitalism is the only system that's both moral and actually works to lift people up.
He also tackles some really controversial social issues head-on. His anti-abortion stance, for example. He argues the unborn child is a human from conception, and while the mother owns her body, she doesn't own the body of another. How does he fit that into his libertarian framework of non-aggression?
Well, the way he squares it, as presented in the book, is by applying the non-aggression principle to what he defines as a distinct human life from conception. The right to life, in his view, is the most fundamental right. So if the fetus is considered a human being, then abortion becomes an act of aggression against that life. It's framed not as restricting the mother's bodily autonomy over herself, but as upholding the non-aggression principle towards another defined individual.
Okay. And he's also critical of much environmentalism and the concept of social justice. What's his reasoning there?
On environmentalism, he often argues it's based on fraud, misusing stats, and used to justify more state control. His solution is typically property rights. He uses the example of elephants in Zimbabwe. give local communities ownership, and they have an incentive to protect and manage the elephants sustainably, solving the tragedy of the commons without state intervention. As for social justice, he flat out calls it unjust. He believes it inevitably leads towards totalitarianism because it requires coercive redistribution through progressive taxes, punishing success. He argues it ultimately traps the poor, ensuring whoever was born poor dies poor, by undermining property rights and individual merit.
Despite all the critiques and the problems he identifies, there's a real sense of optimism in his writing, isn't there? He says something like, "We don't know what the future will be like, only that it will be much better."
Absolutely. He has this deep belief in Argentina's potential. He constantly points back to the 1853 Constitution, arguing that when Argentina embraced those liberal principles, individual rights, free markets, it became a world power. He cites data suggesting freer countries are dramatically wealthier, like 8 times richer with 40 times fewer poor people. The path forward for him is clear. Embrace freedom fully.
And he ends with that very direct call to action aimed right at the listener. Don't be mere witnesses. Get into the mud. Give the battle. Be protagonists. Let's be a power again. It's quite a rallying cry. So we've really traced quite a journey today. Javier Milei's path from grappling with hyperinflation as a kid, through his academic shifts, his media emergence, right up to being this major voice for radical libertarianism. It's a story of profound intellectual change, driven by experience, deep study, and a willingness to challenge basically everything.
It really is. And it leaves us, and you, the listener, with a pretty potent question, doesn't it? If Milei's core argument holds that real progress, real happiness, depends on maximizing freedom and minimizing the state, what does that mean for the things we take for granted? What specific sacred cows, those deeply held beliefs or institutions in our own societies, would be challenged by that kind of perspective? What would confronting those actually mean for your own individual path to liberty?
Something definitely worth thinking about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive today. We look forward to exploring more ideas with you next time on Books and Bytes.